"You fed my son. Now I belong to you by ancestral tradition," said the Apache mother to the rancher. "What happened next will shatter everything you thought you knew about family, loyalty, and the bonds that truly matter." Garrett had never intended to stay this long on the Colorado Mesa. When he first arrived 4 years ago, it was meant to be temporary, a place to disappear after the war took his leg and his peace of mind. The fever that followed claimed his wife and unborn child. After that, towns meant questions, people meant pity, and he wanted neither. So he built his ranch from timber and stone, dug his own well, and raised his cattle in solitude. It wasn't grand, but it withstood the mountain storms. The livestock thrived, the house stayed warm, and he kept moving forward. That was his only rule: keep moving. That October morning began like most others. He was splitting firewood behind the barn when movement caught his peripheral vision. The ground was hard with early frost, and his bad leg ached with each swing of the axe. But he didn't complain, just shifted his weight and continued working. The sun hung low over the peaks, pale and distant. When he reached for another log, something made him pause. Motion. 30 yards away at the edge of the pine grove, a small shape crouched behind a fallen tree trunk. Garrett stood motionless, watching. No animal moved that way. No adult could hide behind that narrow trunk. He squinted and began walking forward slowly, boots crunching through frost-brittle grass. As he approached, the shape resolved into a child, a boy, Apache by his appearance, no older than 9 or 10. The child was curled tight, knees pulled to his chest, arms wrapped around his shins. No jacket, no shoes, dirt streaked across his face and matted in his black hair. His lips were cracked from cold and thirst. His eyes were open but unfocused, staring into nothing. The boy didn't flinch when Garrett knelt beside him. He didn't speak or acknowledge the man's presence in any way. "Hey there," Garrett said softly. "You hurt?" The child blinked once but showed no other sign of understanding. His small jaw trembled from cold. Garrett slipped off his coat and wrapped it around the boy's thin shoulders. The child's bones felt fragile as bird wings beneath the fabric. He smelled of earth and old campfire smoke. Still no response. Garrett didn't ask more questions. He lifted the boy carefully, one arm supporting his legs, the other his back. The child didn't struggle or stiffen. That worried Garrett more than screaming would have. He carried the boy across the field toward the ranch house. Inside, he laid him on the bearskin rug before the stone fireplace. The fire was already burning strong. Garrett added more wood and worked the bellows until flames leapt higher, filling the room with warmth. He grabbed a tin cup, filled it with lukewarm water, and brought it to the boy's lips. The child drank in tiny sips as if he didn't trust the water to last. Then Garrett heated leftover stew and cornbread, breaking it into small pieces the boy could manage. The child ate with both hands, desperate, silent, fast. Garrett stood with arms crossed, mind racing. Where was this boy's family, his tribe? How far had he traveled? How long had he been hiding in those woods? After eating, the boy pulled Garrett's coat tighter around himself and leaned his head against the hearthstones. Sleep claimed him so quickly it startled the rancher. Garrett sat at his kitchen table, watching the child's breathing, noting how his ribs showed through his thin shirt. His stomach tightened with anger at whatever had brought this boy to such a state. He kept the fire burning through the night and dozed in his chair, alert for anyone who might come looking, friend or foe. The boy didn't wake until the next evening. He simply shifted once during the night and settled back into deep sleep. Garrett checked his pulse regularly, steady, no fever. The child just needed rest. Garrett cleaned the boy's feet with warm water, tore an old flannel shirt to wrap them, and laid another blanket over his small frame. Outside, he tended his animals, chopped more wood, and scanned the tree line. Still no sign of anyone. By the third morning, Garrett had begun wondering if the child had been abandoned deliberately. He was reinforcing a loose gate on the horse corral when his dog barked once sharply, then fell silent. Garrett looked up. A figure was walking up the mesa trail, a woman, moving with measured steps despite obvious exhaustion. She traveled alone, one hand pressed against her side as if nursing an injury. Her dress was traditional deerskin, weathered and stained from long travel, clinging to her curves in the mountain wind. The neckline had stretched from wear, revealing the gentle curve of her chest. One seam along her side had torn, exposing the bronze skin of her waist. Her legs, dusty and scratched, showed beneath the high slits of her skirt. She wore no shoes. Her hair hung in thick braids, adorned with feathers and beads. Her face was striking. High cheekbones, determined jaw, dark eyes rimmed with exhaustion but alert with purpose. She didn't call out or wave, just kept walking steadily toward the house. Garrett stood still, hands at his sides, not reaching for the rifle leaning against the fence post. She posed no threat, just bone-deep weariness. She stopped several yards from the porch, chest rising and falling from exertion. "I search for my child," she said. Her voice was quiet, accented but clear. Garrett nodded once and stepped aside. She walked past him without another word, moving with the dignity of someone accustomed to hardship. The boy stirred when his mother entered. His voice cracked as he whispered, "Mama." The woman dropped to her knees and pulled the child against her chest, fingers stroking his hair, lips pressed to his forehead. The boy clung to her with renewed strength. Garrett stood in the doorway, watching the reunion by firelight. The woman looked up at him. Her eyes were red-rimmed but dry. "My name is Nayeli," she said. "This is my son, Chayton." Garrett nodded. "I'm Garrett." Nayeli looked down at her son, then did something unexpected. She remained kneeling and spoke slowly, carefully. "I follow the old ways. You fed my son when he was hungry. You sheltered him when he was lost. You kept him safe when he was vulnerable." She paused, meeting Garrett's eyes. "By our traditions, this creates a sacred debt. I belong to your household now, if you will accept." She didn't elaborate or try to explain further. She simply waited. Garrett stared at her. He didn't believe in ancient customs or sacred debts, but something about her tone, the gravity, the stillness, prevented him from dismissing her words. He saw the dirt under her fingernails, the thin line of bruises on her forearm, her ribs visible through the torn seam of her dress. She had endured something terrible, something she wasn't ready to name. He looked at Chayton again, now sleeping peacefully in his mother's arms. They had nowhere else to go. Garrett stepped back, hand on the doorframe, and gestured them inside. "You're welcome here," he said simply. Nayeli's eyes showed relief, but she just nodded once. She stood, gathered her son, and stepped fully into the ranch house. Garrett closed the door behind them with quiet finality that felt heavier than it should have. The morning after Nayeli entered Garrett's home, the wind had calmed, but the cold remained sharp. A light snow had dusted the fence posts and roof shingles, thin enough to melt by noon, but thick enough to announce winter's approach. Garrett was outside before dawn, breaking ice from the water trough and checking the smoke rising straight from his chimney. When he returned inside, Nayeli was already kneeling by the fireplace, feeding wood to the flames with practiced movements. Chayton, Garrett now knew the boy's name, was curled beside the fire under the wool blanket, one hand tucked beneath his cheek. His breathing was soft and regular now. Nayeli didn't look up when Garrett entered. She continued arranging wood, then reached into a cloth bundle and pulled out dried beans he'd given her the night before. She moved with quiet confidence, as if every task had been learned in another lifetime. Garrett watched her work. Her dress was still torn, the neckline drooping low, revealing more than modesty would typically allow. But there was nothing seductive about her manner, only practical focus on survival. Still, he noticed the finger-shaped bruises on her upper arms, now more visible in the flickering firelight, fresh but healing. "You need clothes," he said, "for both of you." Nayeli nodded without looking at him. "Chayton needs warmth more than I do." The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable but heavy with unspoken history. Garrett poured water into his kettle and hung it over the fire. Nayeli stood and moved to the other side of the cabin, hanging blankets she'd washed near the stove to dry. That's when Garrett noticed her limp. Her left ankle was swollen and discolored. "You're favoring that foot." She glanced down, then back up. "We walked many days." "From where?" She hesitated. "South, 5 days." "Anyone following?" Nayeli's expression became unreadable. "Not anymore." That answer revealed enough. Garrett didn't press for details. Supplies were running low. If he was going to feed 2 extra people through the coming winter, he needed to ride into town. He hated going to Silverbrook. Too many stairs, too much curiosity about the hermit rancher. But he had no choice now. "I'll ride to town tomorrow," he said. "Supplies. Boots for the boy. Fabric for your dress." Nayeli turned, her voice soft. "Not necessary. You'll freeze in that torn thing. I can mend it. You need shoes, too." She didn't argue after that, just lowered her eyes and nodded. Chayton stirred by the fire, sitting up slowly and looking at Garrett as if still assessing whether this man could be trusted. The wariness in his young eyes spoke of hard experience. "You hungry?" Garrett asked. The boy nodded. Nayeli crouched beside her son and helped him sit upright, placing a folded blanket behind his back for support. Garrett handed over a tin plate of beans and cornbread, which Chayton took carefully with both hands. The child ate quietly, the same way his mother did. No noise, no mess, as if they'd learned not to draw unwanted attention even while eating. After breakfast, Nayeli helped gather feed for the animals. Garrett showed her where he stored grain sacks and tools. She watched him work the barn latch, then tried it herself, eyes sharp and hands quick. He noticed how she kept Chayton in sight constantly, always positioning him safely in corners, wrapping him in spare coats, checking on him every few minutes. That afternoon, Garrett watched from the corral as Nayeli mended her torn dress. She sat on the porch steps, legs folded beneath her, dark hair falling across her shoulder. She was focused and graceful in a way that spoke of weathered strength rather than delicate beauty. Her chest still showed through the sagging neckline, and when she leaned forward to pull thread taut, the movement caught his attention. But Garrett forced himself to look away. She wasn't his, and he wouldn't treat her as if she were. That evening, while Chayton slept beside the fire, Garrett stepped outside to check his animals one final time. The stars were brilliant in the thin mountain air, and coyotes called from distant ridges. Nayeli joined him minutes later, arms crossed, a wool shawl pulled over her shoulders. They stood in comfortable silence for a long time. "My husband died 2 winters ago," she said quietly. "We stayed with others after that, Apache families, some good, some not." She paused. Men came, white men, but not soldiers or law, just men who took what they wanted. Garrett waited, not pushing. They took food, blankets, tools, then they wanted more. Her voice remained steady. "I ran with Chayton. They didn't chase us, too much trouble for one woman and a child, but I saw what they did to others who stayed." She looked straight ahead into the darkness. "I came to you because you fed him. In our way, that means everything. Only a man with honor feeds a stranger's child." Garrett let out a slow breath. "I'm not a good man. I'm just alone." "That's exactly why I came," she said. "Only men with empty homes make space for those who need it." He didn't know how to respond to that, so he said nothing. She didn't move closer, but she didn't leave either. And somehow, that was enough. The next morning broke gray and cold, with low clouds promising more snow. Garrett was saddling his horse when Nayeli appeared in the barn doorway, wrapped in a blanket, still barefoot despite the cold. "You should rest that ankle," he said. "I want to help." "You can't help on a bad foot." She didn't answer, only looked toward the stall where Chayton sat quietly brushing one of the ponies with a broken-handled brush Garrett had given him. "I'm riding to town today," Garrett said. Nayeli nodded slowly, then hesitated. "Will they know me there?" He stopped adjusting the bridle and looked at her. They'll notice you. But I doubt anyone in Silverbrook would recognize your face or know your story. Closest Apache settlements are days from here. Relief flickered across her features. That's all I needed to know. Garrett finished tacking up and mounted. As he prepared to ride out, Chayton ran over, his small legs crunching through frost. He handed Garrett a twisted figure made of pine twigs and dried grass. "For protection," the boy said in careful English. Garrett took the small talisman and tucked it into his shirt pocket. "Thank you. I'll be back before dark." Nayeli came up beside her son and rested a gentle hand on his shoulder. "We'll wait." The ride to Silverbrook took 3 hours through mountain passes already showing early snow. Garrett hadn't been to town since late spring, and even then only for fence wire and grain. He never lingered or made conversation. The general store still had its windows covered with faded tobacco advertisements. The bell over the door gave a half-hearted jangle as he entered. Frank Morrison, the shopkeeper, looked up from his newspaper with the same suspicious eyes as always. "Garrett," Frank said, not bothering to hide his surprise, "didn't expect to see you before spring." "Didn't plan on it," Garrett replied. Frank's tight smile didn't reach his eyes. "What can I do for you?" Garrett listed items slowly: flour, salt, beans, jerky, thread, needles, a blanket, small boots, warm fabric. He avoided explaining why he needed children's clothing or why he required sewing materials that clearly weren't for mending ranch gear. Instead of asking about a dress directly, he inquired about extra fabric. "Got any cotton bolts in back?" "Some quilting material. Few wool remnants, too." "I'll take both." Frank raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions. As he packed the goods, Garrett noticed a small coat hanging on a peg by the door, lined with rabbit fur, sized for a child. "How much for that coat?" Frank squinted at the garment. "Thing's half worn out." "I'll take it." $3. Garrett paid without haggling. Outside, he strapped everything to his pack mule and mounted up. The sky was darkening earlier than he'd hoped, and wind had picked up. He spurred his horse homeward, not stopping until he reached his own land. The ranch house was quiet when he arrived. No smoke from the chimney, no sounds from the yard. His heart climbed into his throat as he swung down and tied the reins quickly. He pushed the door open fast but stopped short at what he saw. The fire was burning steadily. Chayton sat cross-legged on the floor with a tin cup in his hands. Nayeli stood behind him, one hand resting lightly on the boy's back while she stirred something in the pot over the fire. She turned slowly to look at Garrett, eyes calm and steady. "You're late." Weather turned. He stepped inside and shut the door. "You cold?" "No." Garrett walked over and dropped his bundle near the hearth. Chayton crawled over and pulled at the sack's opening, letting out a soft sound of surprise when he found the fur-lined coat. He held it up and looked at his mother. Nayeli took the coat gently, turned it in her hands, then looked back at Garrett. "You thought of warmth, not just food." He nodded. "Seemed necessary." "I know what this means," she said quietly. "In your way and mine." Garrett didn't respond immediately. Nayeli walked toward him slowly, bare feet silent on the wooden floor. She stopped close, not touching, not crowding, just near enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes. "In my traditions," she said, "a man who feeds, protects, and brings warmth is not just offering shelter. He's offering home." Garrett shifted slightly but didn't move away. "I don't need promises. I want you to know I didn't choose this because I was forced," she continued. "I chose it because you made space without asking for anything in return." She reached up then and placed her hand lightly on his forearm, a touch meant to ground rather than persuade. Garrett looked at her for a long moment. "All right," he said. That night, as they all sat near the fire with Chayton tucked between them, wearing his new coat, something shifted in the cabin's atmosphere. It wasn't dramatic or sudden, but the space between Garrett and Nayeli no longer felt like distance. It felt like anticipation, waiting for the right moment to bridge whatever gap remained. Over the following days, as early winter settled over the mesa, They fell into domestic rhythms. Nayeli woke before sunrise to light the fire and prepare meals without needing instruction. She learned where Garrett stored supplies, how he preferred his coffee, which tools needed sharpening. Chayton began helping too, trailing behind his mother with quiet steps, sweeping the floor with a pine broom Garrett carved for him. The boy's persistent cough had worried Garrett at first, but Nayeli brewed herbal teas and applied warm compresses that gradually cleared his chest. Garrett noticed how competently she managed their small household, how she anticipated needs before they became problems. This wasn't just survival. This was a woman who understood the rhythms of domestic life, who took pride in creating comfort from simple materials. The atmosphere between Garrett and Nayeli had changed since his return from town. She was still careful, still avoided his direct gaze when she bent near the hearth or reached past him for supplies. But once, when she was stitching her dress collar higher for modesty, she glanced up to see if he was watching. He was. She didn't look away. 3 nights later, Chayton fell asleep on the floor again, curled under his new blanket. The cabin was warm from the day's fire, and wind had settled outside. Garrett sat at the table mending a broken harness, hands working slowly by lamplight. Nayeli sat near the fire, sewing. Her dress had been repaired, higher neckline, new ties at the sides, but it still followed the curves of her waist and hips in the flickering light. Garrett caught himself looking more often now, but he still hadn't touched her. Around midnight, as the fire burned low, Nayeli stood quietly and crossed to where he sat. Her steps were deliberate, purposeful. She didn't speak, just reached out and took the broken leather from his hands. She inspected the tear, running her thumb across the split. "You pull too hard," she said softly. "You don't need to force it." He watched her capable fingers work the leather. "You always fix things yourself?" she asked. "Had to." She set the harness gently on the table, then positioned herself between him and the hearth. The firelight behind her outlined her silhouette in golden shadow. Her dress shifted slightly in the heat, the curve of her chest visible again in the warm light. "I'm not afraid of men," she said, expression serious. "I didn't think you were. But I am afraid of what men think they own." Garrett leaned forward, elbows on the table, gaze steady. "I don't own you." She tilted her head slightly. "Not yet." There was no accusation in her voice, just acknowledgement of fact. "You're not here because I claimed you," he said. "I know. I'm here because you didn't try to." Silence settled between them, the kind that carried weight. Nayeli moved to the hearth and stirred the coals once before turning back. "You had a wife?" she asked. Garrett nodded. "Years ago, and a child that never was born." Nayeli sat slowly on the floor, knees drawn close. "I had a sister. She was with us when the men came." "What happened?" She didn't answer immediately. "She didn't run fast enough," she said finally. Garrett understood. They didn't speak more that night, but before Nayeli went to sleep, she placed a second blanket on the floor, one that had been hers alone until now, and folded it beside her son, making space wide enough for someone else. She didn't say who it was for, but she didn't need to. The next morning, Garrett woke to the smell of fried salt pork and strong coffee. Nayeli stood barefoot at the stove, sleeves rolled up, moving gracefully between pot and pan. Chayton was outside gathering kindling, his coat buttoned tight against the cold. When Garrett stepped behind Nayeli to reach for a cup, she leaned back just slightly, not away from him, but toward him. The gesture was subtle, but unmistakable. As days grew shorter and snow began accumulating, the boundaries within the cabin shifted gradually. They no longer moved around each other like polite strangers. Nayeli kept Garrett's cup separate from the others, served his plate without waiting to be asked. Chayton had taken to calling him Uncle Garrett, testing the word like a puzzle piece he wasn't sure would fit, then saying it with increasing confidence when Garrett responded warmly. One morning, while Garrett split wood behind the cabin, Nayeli stood nearby with a bucket of hot water and clean rags. Chayton sat on the porch step, humming an Apache song while mending his small doll's cloth arm. "You'll need more supplies soon," Nayeli observed, watching him stack the split logs. "I'll make another trip before the pass closes." "We should come with you." "No." He looked at her directly. "They'll stare. Might ask questions I don't want to answer." Nayeli's gaze didn't flinch. "Are you ashamed of us?" Garrett wiped sweat from his brow despite the cold. "Just cautious. There are people in town who think Apache blood doesn't belong this close to their neat little lives, especially not in a white man's house." "Then let them wonder," she said, turning toward the porch. "Truth keeps you warm. Their opinions don't." He didn't respond, but her words stayed with him long after the wood was stacked. That evening, the three of them shared elk stew and cornbread around the table instead of scattered throughout the cabin. Chayton told them about the ravens he'd counted that day, 8, maybe 9, but one might have been a hawk. Garrett found himself actually listening, even smiling, not because of the birds, but because the boy's voice no longer held the fearful tension it had carried when he first arrived. After the meal, Nayeli helped wash dishes. They stood side by side, elbows occasionally brushing. When she reached for a cloth on the shelf behind him, her breast grazed his arm through the repaired neckline of her dress. Despite her modest alterations, the contact was unmistakable. She noticed. He noticed. Neither acknowledged it with words. When the dishes were clean, Garrett sat by the fire to rest his aching leg. The old injury always worsened with cold weather. Nayeli crossed the room deliberately and sat beside him without asking permission, her thigh resting softly against his. Her dress had shifted higher, exposing the smooth line of her leg. She didn't adjust it. Her eyes remained on the fire. "You limp more now," she observed. "Old wound, axe up in winter. From the war. Union cavalry. Still have enemies in some places, but I don't go looking for them." She looked down at his hands. "You don't shake when you sleep anymore." He glanced at her, surprised. "You've been watching? The first night you brought us here, you flinched like someone was still chasing you." Garrett didn't deny it. "Been a long time since I shared a roof with anyone." Nayeli shifted, turning slightly toward him. "I know what it means to dream of hands around your throat and wake up with no voice left." He studied her face. Her tone was calm, but her hands were clenched in her lap. "You're safe here," he said. "I know, but safety doesn't make the past smaller, just quieter." She reached over and placed her hand gently on his chest. Fingers spread over his heart. He didn't move. Her thumb brushed the scar near his collarbone where shrapnel had torn through cloth and skin. A wound he'd never explained to anyone. Nayeli didn't ask about it. Her hand lingered, warm, steady, real. "Do you still think I came here just because of tradition?" she asked softly. He looked into her eyes. There was no demand in her question, just quiet need for clarity. "No," he said. "Then tell me what you see when you look at me." "I see someone who survived worse than she lets on, someone who keeps her dignity even when she shouldn't have to fight for it." Her eyes glistened slightly, but no tears fell. "And if I told you I want more than shelter, would you pull away?" Garrett's hand moved, resting gently on her waist. His thumb traced the edge where fabric met skin. He didn't press or pull, just stayed present. "I'd stay," he said. She leaned forward until their foreheads touched. Then her lips brushed his cheek, lingering just beside his mouth. She didn't press further, and he didn't push. The moment held its own weight, significant, without being rushed. That night, when Chayton was deep asleep beneath his quilts, Nayeli slipped into Garrett's bed for the first time. She remained fully clothed, her hand tucked inside his shirt, her body warm against his side. They didn't make love, they didn't speak, but sleep came to both of them without nightmares for the first time in years. When Garrett woke the next morning, pale light filtered through frost-covered window panes. The storm had passed during the night, leaving thick white silence across the mesa. Snow weighted the roof heavily enough that rafters creaked. Inside, the fire had burned low, but the bed was warm. Nayeli lay beside him, one arm draped across his chest, breathing slow and deep. Her hair had come loose from its braid, spreading across his shoulder. Her leg rested over his, curves soft and real, beneath the blankets. Her dress was rumpled but still on, her body folded against his in a way that left no space between them. She hadn't asked permission to be there. She had simply stayed. Garrett lay still for a long while, listening to the hushed world outside, feeling how her weight anchored him to something he'd forgotten he wanted. He didn't feel trapped. He felt chosen. Chaitin's cough echoed softly from across the room, a dry sound followed by rustling blankets. Garrett shifted carefully, but Nayeli stirred and opened her eyes. There was no embarrassment in her expression, no apology, just calm acceptance. "I'll get him water," she whispered. "I'll do it," Garrett said, already moving. She watched him cross the room barefoot and shirtless, his body marked by old scars, burns across his ribs, clean bullet wounds on his back, rope marks at his wrists. She didn't look away. He knelt beside Chaitin and touched the boy's forehead gently, still warm but not fevered. "You okay, son?" Chaitin nodded, eyes half closed. "Throat hurts." Garrett handed him a cup of warm water, then dipped a cloth in the basin and pressed it against the boy's neck. Nayeli appeared beside him with a pouch of dried herbs. "I'll make tea, it helps." They worked together quietly, naturally, like they'd done it for years instead of weeks. Later that morning, as snow fell again in lazy flakes, Garrett bundled Chaitin in blankets and settled him in a chair by the hearth. The boy held a doll made of corn husks and cloth scraps, something Nayeli had crafted the day before. "I don't want to go back," Chaitin said suddenly. Garrett looked up from the firewood he was stacking. "Back where?" The boy shook his head. "Anywhere but here." Nayeli had gone still at the stove, shoulders tight with tension. Garrett crossed the room and squatted beside the chair. "You're not going anywhere," he said firmly. "Not unless you and your mother choose to." Chaitin studied him for a long moment, then said, "You talk in your sleep sometimes." Garrett blinked. "Do I?" "You say a name, not Mama's. Another woman's name." Garrett's jaw tightened slightly. Nayeli had turned, her face unreadable. He stood slowly. "I used to talk to ghosts," he said. "I don't anymore." That evening, after dinner and after Chaitin had fallen into deeper sleep, Nayeli stepped outside onto the porch. Garrett followed. The moon was bright, reflecting silver across snow that stretched unbroken to the distant peaks. Cold, but not biting. Nayeli stood with arms crossed over her chest, shawl wrapped tight, but the neckline of her dress still hung low, exposing the curve of her breasts as wind tugged at the edges. She didn't adjust it. Garrett's eyes lingered, not with simple lust, but with something deeper. Appreciation. She wasn't trying to tempt him. She was just herself, warm, honest, beautiful, in ways that had nothing to do with seduction. "Do you miss your people?" he asked. She nodded. "Some are dead. Others, they gave me no choice. A woman without a husband becomes a burden, or a target." "You had no brothers?" "None who stayed to help." He absorbed that. "Do you ever want to go back?" "I used to dream of something better. Now I think maybe this is better. A man who listens, a roof that holds, a child who doesn't cry himself to sleep." She looked up at him. "Do you think you're that man?" "I'm trying to be. You don't touch without meaning. You wait. You make space." She turned to face him fully, stepping closer. Her fingers reached up and loosened the tie behind her neck. The top of her dress opened just enough to show the line between her breasts, the graceful curve of her collarbone. "I choose you," she said quietly. "Not because I owe you, because I want to." Garrett's chest rose once, slow and deep. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he stepped forward, raised one hand, and rested it on her waist, fingers curving against the soft deerskin. She didn't flinch. Then his hands slid up across her back, drawing her closer until their bodies pressed together. Her dress loosened further. He kissed her shoulder first, slow and deliberate, then her neck, then finally her mouth. She kissed him back deeply, hungrily, but with steady control. Inside, Chaitan slept peacefully. Outside, snow whispered across the mesa like a blessing. That night, Nayeli lay in Garrett's bed again. But this time, the dress came off entirely, and neither of them dreamed of ghosts or regrets, only of the life they were building together, one day at a time. By spring, when the snows melted and wildflowers bloomed across the mesa, Garrett and Nayeli had married in a simple ceremony witnessed by the circuit judge and attended by no one but Chaitan. People in town stared, of course, a white rancher and an Apache woman. But Garrett took her hand in plain sight as they walked past the saloon, and no one dared say a word. Nayeli was pregnant by summer's end. Chaitan helped prepare the nursery corner, and Garrett built a rocking chair from pine, sanding every board by hand. When their daughter was born the following winter, a healthy girl with dark eyes and strong lungs, Garrett wept quietly as he held her. They named her Elena, and Chaitan insisted on teaching her songs from both sides of her heritage. The ranch prospered, the family grew strong, and what had begun with one simple act of feeding a hungry child had grown into something neither Garrett nor Nayeli had dared hope for, a true home, built not just from tradition, but from love freely chosen and daily renewed. Sometimes the most profound transformations begin with the smallest acts of kindness. And sometimes, ancient wisdom knows exactly how to heal hearts that have forgotten how to trust.